everyone. My name is Julia Jackson. For those of you who don't know me, hello, everyone that I know that's tuning in. I'm really excited for this conversation today. This is a very, very important conversation. I was just on the ground with a few people on the panel here at COP26, and we are in a dire situation with the climate crisis. I'm sure all of you know that. It's code red for humanity. Collectively, we're actually on track to reach 2.6, 2.7 degrees Celsius, and we must stay well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. I overheard a lot of conversations about different technologies and a lot of techno-optimism to get us out of the climate crisis. While we do need some of these technologies, we can't destroy major carbon sinks and biodiversity and expect to be okay. We need these life support systems. We need our biosphere intact. And so that's why today's conversation is so important, because it's about legally protecting the earth and all of these keystone species and ecosystems that are making up our life support. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our moderator, who's a dear friend of mine, Kevin Patel. He's started his climate activism at age 11. He's 21 now, and even though he's currently in finals right now, so thank you for taking the time to moderate this panel. And a lot of young people feel like they shouldn't have to be doing this activism because, I don't want to speak for you, Kevin, like you're in the middle of school. But thank you for your urgency on this crisis, for all of the work you do founding One Up Action, and for also being an Earth Guardian yourself. And I know that you're going to have a really bright future. So I'm going to kick it over to Kevin to moderate. And thank you to all of our esteemed panelists, all of these amazing Earth lawyers who have their own legislative frameworks that really can protect and safeguard our future.
Thank you so much, Julia. My name is Kevin Patel. I'm the Executive Director of One Up Action. I have been helping young people with resources to take their ideas and turn them into action, tangible action that will make a difference in the world. Today, we assembled a group of experts, lawyers, and campaigners who can speak about the current and emerging legal frameworks that help protect our planet and its ecosystems. Our panelists have dedicated their careers to advancing environmental law and movements like Stop Ecocide and the rights of nature that help advance climate change mitigation and adaptation. So please welcome Jojo, Chuck, Zed, Paulette, and Elizabeth.
Hi. I'm Jojo Mehta, co-founder of Stop Ecocide International. We're an initiative. We find ourselves at the communicational hub, if you like, of a growing global movement with one particular goal, which is to criminalize mass damage and destruction of ecosystems at the international level, placing ecocide alongside genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be here today. My name is Chuck O'Neill. I'm chairman of the Florida Rights of Nature Network. Also, previous chairman of the Right to Clean Water Political Committee and current chair of the FL5.org Political Committee. Great to be here.
Hello, I'm Zaid Rad Al Hussein. I'm currently the president of the International Peace Institute and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania Law Faculty, in the law faculty there teaching human rights. I was the human rights chief for 4 years, and I presided over the negotiations on the closing negotiations on the introduction of a new amendment to the Rome Statute that Jojo just spoke of when it came to the crime of aggression. I was the first presiding president of the governing body of the International Criminal Court. I was a drafter at Rome, and I presided over the negotiations on the elements of crimes for the constituent crimes or the offenses under the Rome Statute. So I'm also advising the delegation of the Maldives in the COP process. So I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm delighted that I bumped into Julia Jackson in Glasgow. And so it's resulted in something like this, which I'm delighted to be a part of.
Elizabeth?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Dunn. I'm the Director of Legal Advocacy at the Earth Law Center. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in Port Angeles, Washington on Cloudland territory. The Earth Law Center works to pass and implement laws at all levels of government, from the local level to international agreements around the world. Although we're a small organization, we have folks working in various countries and have been assisting and amplifying communities who are elevating the rights of nature and indigenous rights. We also work on educating and training lawyers, judges, the public, community members about Earth Law to amplify this work. And recently published a textbook on Earth Law that has received great interest. So happy to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
And then last but not least, Paula.
Yes, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks Ellie for jumping on. I love this. Good to see my good sister here. My name is Paula Jordan. I'm a former House representative of Idaho. I started this nonprofit, Save the American Salmon, some years ago. It's a wonderful nonprofit teaming up with Earth Law Center. And of course, as a founder and chairwoman, my goal or initiative has been to work with tribes and local state governments, national and international leaders to provide a pathway forward for finding a legal construct around the rights of nature.
Thank you all, and let's get started. Climate change is presenting an enormous risk for life on our planet and for the future. Addressing this must be a top priority, and law can be used as a tool to create powerful change to protect the people and the planet. In recent years, momentum has grown behind the movement to harness the law to protect life on Earth. Some of the movements falling under this umbrella and criminalizing ecocide, the rights of nature, and climate litigation. I will go on to, Elizabeth, to kind of set the stage of, and start off with the question of, can you describe from a legal perspective what the legal protection of the planet is and how it can be applied to slow climate change and reduce climate injustice?
Thanks. Well, that is a big question, but the way I look at this in terms of climate justice and climate change is that those are symptoms of the imbalance that we have in the way that we're living with the Earth. We're out of balance. Our relationship with the Earth is out of balance. And I say that kind of globally, the way things have evolved. And Earth Law is a means of helping to restore that by developing legal tools and legal systems that better reflect the way we need to live in a right relationship with the Earth. Our current legal structures, for the most part, allow exploitation and degradation of the environment. It's really just a question of how much exploitation and degradation is allowed, which is a very different place to start than looking at what does the Earth actually need to exist and thrive, and what do we as humans need in relationship with the Earth to exist and thrive. Those really aren't two separate questions. Those are interrelated. We are not separate from the Earth. And so one of the things is dispelling the myth that there is any competition between human rights and the rights of nature and these concepts we're talking about in a rights framework, that it's really in a different mindset. And so we have a lot of work to do to transform what is really a Western legal construct that's developed and been, and speaking in the United States, has been imposed upon the framework that has been imposed really based on this colonial mindset of exploitation. So we're undoing all of those layers, and that's why it's all interrelated to all these different movements. And so when we say Earth Law, we talk broadly about all the things we're going to hear about today, including rights of nature. And I think that's the piece I can speak to, briefly. I guess one message I really want to make clear is that the situation is dire, but there's also a lot of hope. And we are at this point where I've seen a tremendous amount of momentum in the last 10 years to this place where everyone, a lot of people are seeing, and that's probably why you're here today, you're seeing that there's a need for these fundamental changes. And the question is, how do we get there? Let's step up and do this work. And so which is why I'm so pleased to see Paulette, one of our partners here today. And I want to talk about, I guess, just covering kind of the scope of the different ways Earth law and rights of nature can be implemented in a legal system. It can go everywhere from local lawmaking to international agreements. And so we work at all those different levels. And it can be everything from binding to non-binding agreements. And part of it is changing the consciousness and the way in which we relate. So that's part of the work in the non-binding agreements. And then some of the binding laws we're working on we're seeing successes with enforcing those laws and actually stopping harms to ecosystems, to indigenous peoples, to peoples of color. And so just to give a couple examples of those, it was just a couple of years ago in the Amazon. And we gave a couple examples actually from other countries, because we work in Latin America where there are actually frameworks in place already in terms of constitutional level recognition of the rights of nature. And then also at the state level, there's recognition of rights to nature in those constitutions and frameworks. And so in some ways, we can see that as the way those countries are moving is sort of foreshadowing where in the US we're going to be moving with this work, and hopefully quite rapidly. There's been decisions recognizing the rights of the Amazon to be restored in Colombia, and those are being implemented. In New Zealand, there was a treaty recognizing the rights of the Whanganui River, and establishing a guardianship body. So giving a voice to nature and making sure nature is heard in these forums and in court. We're currently working with First Nation in Canada to add a voice of the river ecosystem to a watershed board. And along with that, amplify Indigenous sovereignty and give through the makeup of the guardians, those speaking for the river, those directly connected with the river, are many of these Indigenous elders, along with people with local knowledge, who can speak to what does the river need. And so I think my main takeaway is that, or my main message here is that we need to start from a place of looking at what does the ecosystem need. And that is the same question as what we need as humans. And to peel back those layers of, our existing law and make those fundamental changes and put those other laws in place. And you'll hear about some of those specific examples today. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And you bring a quite a great framework to this conversation around law and nature and people. I want to move to Paulette, and Paulette, you bring an important perspective to this as well, to this conversation, having served on the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council, Idaho State Legislator, in the National Conference of the State Legislators as chair of the Native American Energy and Transportation Committee and other committees. Can you please speak about your work as it relates to the legal protection of the earth and the contributions you've made to protecting nature and humanity?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's really the Indigenous perspective that takes the front and center stage of having the real knowledge, the true knowledge that matters in helping us move forward. I think all the experience as a state legislator, as a national leader in other business or corporate sectors, working with energy and technology, also having served the Mine Tribal Council, as you've mentioned, all of that has just been experience to help me see from a different perspective how other people are thinking and really where their minds go when it comes to business developments and other arrangements. Now we're looking at transportation as we're, the bill, through the White House is, hopefully will be signed in large sum to help us elevate clean energy and clean technology. But as we're trying to move forward in all these different spaces, we have to find a balance between the industry and the environment. And as an Indigenous woman and being raised with my culture, how we speak and how we live the way our lives is very naturally connected to all of nature. And because it's a way of life, it's a separate way of thinking. And because we're bred up this way, raised in our homes, raised by our elders, and technically I would say to Ellie in talks like this that it is really truly embedded in our DNA. It often feels like this cannot be taught because we just naturally think this way, this connectedness. We see Earth as a grander spirit, bigger than us, even more important than us. And we are just here as beings biding time, borrowing from other beings. And so we have to find a balance and the right space to exist. And the unfortunate circumstance that we are facing now is that we think we're above nature, we're above everything, we're above the planet, we're above water, we're above the air, and that technically is not the case. So we're all really disillusioned to believe that. And as a politician, as a businesswoman, it has become my responsibility to find the right balance between both the business sector, politics, the social interactions that we have, and try to further that engagement and just that overall connectedness. Much like Elliot said, it's really become a social construct, this legal movement of the rights of nature.
100%. And, you bring such an important perspective to this. Indigenous sovereignty is something that, I and, all the Indigenous young people that I've worked with is something that, we continue to not see within the environmental movement and within these spaces. And so it's to make sure that the perspective of Indigenous peoples is not just heard, but actually being included at the table is something that we need to have within the movement, not only legally in the law space or in the government offices and whatnot, but even in the movement spaces, right? And so that's something that I tend to not see. And I hope, this movement is changing rapidly. And I really hope that we get to see more Indigenous perspectives. So thank you so much for being here, Paulette. I'm going to move to Chuck as, Chuck, as a chairman of the Florida Rights of Nature Network, you are heavily involved in advocating for better environmental protection in Florida. And my question to you is, do you believe the rights of nature could be an effective legal framework and solution to the climate crisis? And if you could just share a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. Kevin, thank you. Absolutely. The rights of nature movement, as well as the human rights expansion throughout the planet, in my opinion, go hand in hand. In Orange County, the county in which I live now, in the center of the state of Florida, we put forward through a charter review commission a proposal that took the shape in two forms. One form, it granted rights to all the citizens of Orange County, the right to clean water. And secondly, it granted all the water bodies in Orange County 4 basic rights: the right to exist, the right to flow, the right to be protected against pollution, and the right to maintain a healthy ecosystem. So by giving rights to nature, that is a step to enact for humans a right to protect themselves, a right to protect their own environment, and in the case of climate change, a right to protect us from the destructive forces that are causing a lot of the problems. So in Orange County, we developed this charter amendment, which is kind of like a constitution for the county. And we put it to the vote, just like in any normal campaign. And on November 3rd of 2020, we were delighted to see that it passed with 89% of the vote. So over 500,000 people voted for this. And that kind of reinforces the fact when we first started talking about the rights of nature, which Florida is probably not known for as being a hotbed of progressivism. When we first started talking about rights of nature, people were like, looked at it as though we were Martians. And as they learn more about it and learn that this is protective and empowering
And I definitely agree with that. Human rights and the rights of nature need to be paired together. And with that being said, I'm going to move to Jojo. The question that I have for you is, like, what is ecocide and what does it look like to legally enforce the crime of ecocide?
Just unmute myself. Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think that moving into the discussion of ecocide is kind of complementary to what we've been hearing so far, but it's also very different. So the rights framework is one legal aspect, and the criminal law framework is a different one. But they're kind of complementary. You could think of them as maybe two sides of a coin. I mean, on a very basic level, your right to life is protected by the fact that murder is a crime. It's a crime to take that life. And the way that we sort of view ecocide is that it effectively, it's a criminal law that can actually protect the rights of nature, but also is a complement to the recently adopted new human right, the right to a clean and safe environment and healthy environment. And in some ways, I mean, we operate at the international level. We're looking for an international law that can have effect globally. So, but at the same time, it's a very sort of precise, strategic legal intervention. This particular route that we follow at the International Criminal Court, with which Zaid is, of course, incredibly familiar, and part of the reason that we aim for that is because there's already an amendment procedure that is actually in place that can be followed strategically, which is probably easier than creating a whole new treaty. We know that we're dealing with having to make serious change within the next few years. So this is something that we don't have time to spend 23 years coming up with a new Paris Agreement that is binding in a way that the Paris Agreement isn't. And I think that criminal law comes in a very precise way in this area because it actually has the potential to change behavior in a way that much of there's a whole body of environmental law in place around the world, much of it in the regulatory sphere. But it's a relatively new body of law, and it doesn't have the kind of same foundational pieces in place, if you like, as potentially other a law that protects people or a law that protects property. So, I mean, if you're campaigning for human rights or you're campaigning for social justice, at least that mass murder and torture are criminal and they're kind of deeply bad and wrong. We don't yet have that same attitude towards how we behave in regard to nature, and we see the climate crisis as effectively a kind of symptom of which mass damage and destruction of ecosystems over decades is a root cause. And so, we see those things as absolutely interlinked. But we also see that inserting a single crime into a list of crimes in a very precise way is a way of intervening in a system that's in place in a way that's clear and understandable, but that also opens a door, creates perhaps a bridge to the legal system overall being able to consider more broadly what, in many precise instances, Paulette and Chuck and Elizabeth have all been outlining, in the sense that it has the potential to kind of have an effect on the moral consciousness, on the sort of public consciousness around how we deal with nature. And so, in that way, although it's a very precise intervention, it also has, the potential to have a sort of very broad and long-term effect. In terms of the practicalities, we actually believe, I mean, interestingly, of course, what we're looking at here is something that's fundamental to the way our economy functions. You don't go to a government and say, can I have a permit to kill 500 people for my new infrastructure project? It literally won't even cross your mind. But you can go get a license for extractive activities like mining, like oil drilling. You can get a license for the kind of fishing that trashes whole swathes of the seabed. All of these kinds of activities are actually licensed, but at their worst, they are actually creating this level of destruction. So it's also important that what is becoming obvious, I think, both to investors, to insurers, to policymakers, to CEOs, is that there is profound change needed, and that whatever we've been doing, over many years with the COP talks, is ultimately not creating that level of change quickly enough. And we believe that creating that parameter at the level of international law has the potential to actually start shifting behavior in the right direction rather more rapidly. And this doesn't have to be seen as a restrictive thing. It can also be seen as a spur to innovation. So we see that for example, the International Corporate Governance Network, which is a network of global asset managers, recently actually issued a statement to the COP26 asking governments to legislate for ecocide. So interesting to see that, even the corporate world is now, acknowledging that a new parameter is actually needed. So, that's a rather kind of a broad strokes introduction, but I'm very happy to sort of weave this in as the conversation goes on.
That's amazing, Jojo. And I know, I'm glad that you mentioned this within your question of Zaid being here. And Zaid, I understand you were involved with the International Criminal Court, and I'm really excited that you were on this panel with Jojo. But I also understand you were part of the COP26 negotiations. But my question to you is, what do you think about the campaigns such as Stop Ecocide that are looking to hold parties responsible for mass destruction of the environment and accountable for their actions in the International Criminal Court?
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you for representing the youth on this panel. I used to think I was one such youthful person, no longer. Well, it's of course a fundamental question, as was raised by the others, and this was clear in the 5th Outlook report on biodiversity issued in September of last year, that we need to speak of one health, the health of the planet, the health of us, inextricably linked, but not just us and the ground we stand on, the rivers we wade in, the sea we enjoy, but all life on it and in it. And that way of looking at the world is the main proposition behind why everyone is on this panel. But the approaches are very different, and they are rather disparate. We need to, I think, above all, sequence everything very carefully, because it's very easy to trip over each other and work cross purposes, with one group pursuing one angle to the detriment of others who are pursuing something along the same lines, but not carefully thought through. When speaking of ecocide, I first of all want to really acknowledge the work that Jojo has done. It's not easy starting something new. And her work has been the subject of a legal vivisection by other lawyers who right away, and this is what lawyers do, they will trash a good idea right away. And they've done this. But I think this is only to be expected. Jojo is a well-experienced lawyer. She knows this. The real essence is, though, contained in the idea that you start thinking in that direction. These are enormously difficult issues. We're not talking about environmental law in the context of the International Criminal Court. We're talking about a penal statute, a criminal statute, and it's not parties, it's individuals. You are going to hold someone criminally responsible for an action. And we have to frame that along the lines of a definition And then you have the grounds for the exercise of jurisdiction, and then you have the amendment procedure, which is insanely difficult, hugely difficult. But what everyone has been saying here is true. This is urgent. And the normal conventional patterns by which we solve and resolve problems need to be rethought, and we need a momentum. And so in my office, we're going to be conducting workshops to basically compare all the different approaches. There was one approach which I think bears our attention, and it's not because it's a Jordanian initiative that I'm instantly and automatically supporting it, but I think there is merit to it, and the King of Jordan outlined it to the General Assembly. And it's not a question of talking about rights of nature. It refers to a right, one right, and that is the right to exist as a species of flora or fauna. And there's a trigger mechanism for the exercise of jurisdiction connected to the IUCN Red List. And it's a very clever sort of way of thinking. And that could be the gap that we need to sort of plug between these various initiatives along a continuum. I think it is critical that we think clearly and think precisely. We can't waste time, and there's a lot of energy that can be wasted pursuing initiatives which ultimately won't go anywhere. So I think we need to all support each other in the way we conduct ourselves in the next few years. Finally, the human rights community is not in favor of these initiatives, and I'll be frank with you. Yes, the rights of indigenous persons is something the human rights community all supports. But I don't count myself as one of those sort of skeptics or one of those who are against what it is that everyone here is trying to do. In fact, I consider to be part of this group. But the rest of the human rights community is very cautious and circumspect because it believes it will draw away energy from the very pressing and enormous challenges that just the rights agenda faces on its own, severely underfunded and with enormous pressure against it, and that this will draw energy away. And I think most people here would agree that it shouldn't be seen as zero-sum. These are not mutually exclusive, they're self-reinforcing, mutually reinforcing, and in that sense, they have to work hand in glove, as was mentioned by Chuck earlier.
With that being said, I'm going to bring in Jojo and Elizabeth and Zada again. What are the next steps to getting greater global momentum behind turning climate action from a political ambition to a legal obligation? That's one of my questions. And then my second question would be, can you all share some of the insights you have found from your work, specifically how legal frameworks can help governments achieve their climate goals? We can move to the first question.
Shall I come in on that one first? I think it's very interesting to see as Zaid was saying, how these things actually interact with each other. I think it's interesting, for example, that the human rights movement is very much behind Indigenous rights, and that actually the Indigenous leaders are also very interested in the ecocide project because they see it as actually reflecting a very sort of deeply held, as Paulette was saying, almost a sort of DNA level kind of understanding of the kind of reciprocity that exists, between us and nature. There's a kind of very basic truth in that, when you damage Mother Earth, there are consequences, and actually that is not currently reflected in the legal system, and so there are these kind of overlaps that could probably bear quite a bit of exposing and delineating in order to show some of these linkages, so that we don't end up with this these situations where the different parts are kind of ultimately probably working to something that they all want, but doing it in their own particular pockets. And I think it's kind of interesting that also it's been interesting for us to see how some of the very established environmental NGOs have not been the first to get behind this idea of criminalizing ecocide. Sometimes it's come from sort of perhaps, we've had interesting support, for example, from the labor movement or from the, from trade unions, but also, as I say, even, from the more sort of leading edge of the corporate world as well. So it's very, very kind of interesting mix going on here. But I also think that, there's a way in which, to go move more to your second question is more about, how can this help governments? And I think that there's an aspect here of putting it, everybody seems to be trying to play the same game better. And actually it's that game that isn't working. We need to be not just playing better, we need to be playing differently. And one way of doing that is to change the parameters within which we're allowed to operate. And so that's, that's kind of where I see the ecocide initiative fitting into actually kind of unleashing some genuine change. And just one very last point on that is actually to come back to something that Zaid said about individual criminal responsibility. I think that's actually, part of the real power of this, because there was actually a study done in, I believe it was Colorado University a few years ago, looking at if you change law in the regulatory sphere, you change corporate budgeting. Whereas if you change if you add a criminal aspect to it, you actually change corporate behavior. And I think that's a really interesting kind of contrast to make. And that, of course, works precisely because it is individuals who have to then answer for their actions.
Elizabeth or Zaid, do you want to add to what Jojo just said?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in briefly on that. And I guess to Jojo's last point, there was actually a time in the US that which you probably know maybe, that the Department of Justice had an environmental crimes division that prosecuted crimes with, jail sentences, right, of CEOs of companies. That was, I believe that program actually still exists. It's just not used very, very much anymore. So it'd be interesting to go back and look at, how effective that is. I think that's definitely one piece of it is, where are the consequences, right? We see these, massive destruction caused by corporations and the amount of money and wealth that can just pay off the bill, and there's no moral accountability. But I think that's what it goes back to still is like this ethical and moral accountability. And I think that's what, Paulette was speaking to. If we have, if we develop this consciousness that, coming out of this mindset of not having that accountability, like you're trying to get away with as much as you can possibly destroy in the natural world, is a completely different mindset than we need to be having. And that's why, for us, and we really consider this movement to be Indigenous-led in the U.S., looking at elders, Indigenous communities for guidance on the way that they have lived in a harmonious way with nature since time immemorial. And so in terms of implementing, taking these, I think the question was like political ambition to legal obligation, and we're doing that through various routes. I mean, you see rapidly local governments are adopting laws and recognizing rights of nature. We're working at the state level, drafting bills, recognizing the rights of endangered species and ecosystems, and then, working at other levels of government. But an important partner for us is tribes, Indigenous peoples, First Nations. And I would say that there's already a, turning it into a legal obligation. It's really just that really just means getting it recognized, right? Getting it recognized in law in an enforceable way that's recognized by our legal system. I mean, I would say it is already a moral obligation. It is already an ethical obligation. It is already existing as something that we need to be doing, is caring for the earth and living in a right relationship with the earth. And so there are a number of pathways to implement the laws through tribal governments, and like I mentioned. And so, I mean, just to underscore here, like, this is happening. I mean, these laws are getting passed. The Nez Perce passed a law recognizing the rights of the Snake River. The Yurok tribe has, the Ponca Nation. So this is all happening. And so to me, I don't have as much of an issue of coordinating as much as just trying to just keep up with assisting and amplifying the voices of our local communities and Indigenous partners that we work with. So I'd love to bring Paulette into this conversation if she
Yeah, no, Paulette, please chime in.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for that, Ellie. And she's doing some wonderful work, which is why we're so excited and just really blessed to have this partnership with Earth Law Center. Ellie, as she mentioned, the good work that we're doing with the tribes is remarkable. It's a challenge in and of itself, however, because as an Indigenous leader, tribes are not only sovereign in their governmental status, but they are working to be economically sovereign. And that's not an easy thing to do in this day and age, especially when we're working with and sometimes against the federal government and local municipalities and local counties, and of course the states that have been built around us. So all of these legal constructs, trying to build our own culture, keeping our ways of life alive, trying to provide a pathway for water, the rights of rivers to flow, the rights of nature to exist, to coexist with us. All of this has been very challenging and still maintains to be a challenge. But the tribal leaders, to me, are a strong pathway forward when it comes to really helping change the culture, not only here in the United States domestically, but internationally, because all tribes or all Indigenous peoples naturally have the same way of thinking. And much like all of you are stating here, that connectedness is, it's the beauty that we see when you look at all of the national parks here in the U.S. All the tribes were just recently kicked out of these parks. And so thank goodness, we have an Indigenous woman that's there as Secretary of Interior. But what if we gave the land back to these tribes to continue caring for these lands? We'd actually continue to see a healthy ecosystem. But because we still have to work within the legal construct that we speak of, the rights of tribes to even exist today, you have to look at that relationship and what that was like even back then when we saw the genocide of Buffalo. Our people said, when you see the genocide of Buffalo, you're going to see the genocide of Indigenous peoples. When you see the depletion of water and the health of water and the health of our soil, you're going to see the depletion of health of our people. So as we already know, everything is interconnected, whether it's the economy, whether it's healthcare, whether it's our school systems, all of that, everything is very, very well connected. So just allowing people to understand, whether it's in their school systems or within our local governments, it really does come down to leadership. Leadership within the home, leadership within our schools, and leadership at the government level and in business. So our ultimate aim is to ensure that of nature is at the forefront. So we have to do a lot of educating, and like Ellie, she knows what our work is like with the Save the American Salmon, of course, working with the tribes. And it's somewhat seems like an uphill battle, like Saeed has said. It's going to be a challenge internationally, but I have full faith in the next generation, because I'm seeing, while many of our national and international leaders aren't willing to step up to the plate and do what's right, our younger generations are already there. And they're already willing to make these shifts without having to be paid or without having to be told what to do. Kevin, you're part of that, leading the front line. And it's, to me, remarkable, because our people, we cannot be bought. Our young people cannot be bought. And they're willing to, put everything aside to show that, hey, we want to save our planet. We want to do what's right for the next 7 generations. And we're not going to kowtow to these corporations. We're not going to kowtow to job security in government. And unfortunately, while our current leadership does not want to support this movement, that is why I am firmly focused on helping elect more Indigenous leaders into local states, governments, state government systems, and national government systems. And it's also why a lot of younger people, I believe, need to step up, and we need to help them, encourage them to get into these local municipalities, local county commissioners, and ensure that they have a seat at the table of the state legislatures, because they can be the voice of nature, because they're already there. And I don't think it's going to take a lot of arm twisting to get them to be on our side. But honestly, I think these voices of authority, leadership, and decision making need to be handed to the next generation. And it's not a matter of them waiting; it's a matter of them stepping up and being willing to do so, because it's not about them waiting for their turn. And I've already kind of been over and done with that when it was my time to step into these leadership roles. But I was always told by my elders that when it's your time and when you're called upon, you just do it. So I'm hoping to emerge the national organization I'm part of to help grow national leadership and women in progressive leadership, and then others. We're working together to help employ this idea that nature should have personhood status. And so I think we're almost there, especially when it comes to tribes being on the front line of these conversations, already having implemented codifying language that nature has personhood status, and how we have to continue this balance. But again, putting it in a legal construct, which is not easy because you have to look at, again, the balance with the environment and being economically sovereign.
With that being said, I think young leaders are not the leaders of tomorrow. We're the leaders of today. We're doing the things that are needing to be done to actually push forward. I think the land back initiative that a lot of young people are involved in. I myself am involved in. It's like if we were to give back land to indigenous peoples, we're even seeing it in California. If we were to just give land back to the indigenous peoples, we wouldn't have so many wildfires because indigenous people of this land. I come from Tongva land. If we were to just give back the land, we would see how everything would change. The ecosystems would protect. And you said something that triggered something in me. It's saying intersectionality is so important in these conversations. When we talk about these issues, it's not a single issue that we must focus on. We must connect all of these issues because it's not just one issue. It's not just one injustice. It's all interconnected. They're all being caused by the same systems of oppression that are causing the environment to environmental damage. But with that being said, I really want to move to Chuck, and I really would love to know how can the public, we have legal experts and campaigners here that have literally been fighting for the rights of nature and stop ecocide, but how can the public participate in the United States in the different movements to harness the law and to protect both the people and the planet?
Yeah, Kevin, a lot of these decisions regarding land use are local decisions, and they're governed by local law or state law. And one of the things that we have going for us in a lot of parts of the country are citizens initiatives, in which citizens can create a law, gather signatures, put it on the ballot, campaign for it, and vote for it, and it becomes law. These are, in my opinion, the public's sole remedy at this point. You might say, well, let's elect leaders who respect nature, respect the rights of people to live in clean and healthy environments. But let's face it, a lot of these folks who do get elected are put in power by the corporations, by the entities that are doing the destruction. So this is the purest form of democracy. This is how we started off in this country, where citizens can get involved, propose an amendment to a charter, an amendment to a state constitution, gather the necessary number of petitions, and put it on the ballot, and then campaign for it. I really think that this is the last frontier for the concerned citizen, and I'm so glad to see you on here, Kevin, because a lot of times when we get together, these groups, they tend to be uh, older people like myself who seem to be concerned and also have the time to invest to put these measures on the ballot. So I know Elizabeth is intimately involved in different communities around the country. The Florida Rights of Nature Network, we're involved with about 30 different municipalities around the state to move forward rights of nature initiatives. So this is one way that the concerned citizen can get involved, and I would encourage them strongly to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chuck. And Zad, I'm going to open that question up to you. I think I would love to hear your perspective on how the public can get involved with this, with protecting, harnessing law to protect the planet.
Kevin, it's a hugely complex issue. This we're only having this discussion because hitherto all efforts seemingly have failed. Otherwise, why are we meeting? We're only meeting because we're dealing with this enormous challenge. And let's not delude ourselves. All these initiatives are worthy in themselves, but given the scale of what we're confronting, it's still pinprick stuff. That's why we're meeting. That's why we have to think about it. That's why we have to galvanize and motivate. I can tell you in the meeting rooms, in the negotiating rooms where I was in COP, I mean, I wasn't in the blue zone, I was in the negotiating rooms. You didn't feel the effect of the youth movement or the indigenous persons movement. There was such a dissipation of energy that when you get to the discussion, they're not there, right? So we can't be sort of glassy-eyed about this. It's very real. It's very tangible. We applaud all the good work. We encourage it, but let's not also fantasize about where we are. The challenges are real. Look at the reports of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I mean, it almost wants to make you cry. And these are the very same countries, by the way, we're looking to have us do exactly the things that we want them to do. Recognize the rights of persons with, indigenous persons. In the African continent, they don't even want to talk about indigenous rights, right? And so I think what we need to do as next steps, and you speak about the youth, is we take those particular instances where actions work at a local level, as Chuck was just saying. We think very carefully, how can we broaden them, make them applicable in other jurisdictions, other cultures, other ways of approaching these issues, and then not struggle, all of us, for the various funding that we're all striving for, and then willing to engage in some sort of bloodbath between civil society actors in pursuit of a wider and broader and more noble good, but actually to work together. And it's much harder than one would I think, at first acknowledge. And the rights movement is a dispersed cellular movement. Rights holders and rights advocates don't want to be told what to do. We like to see ourselves as leaderless, and we lead ourselves, but don't you try and lead me. And that also weakens us. And so we have to be clear about all of this, and really sit and bang heads together and think of sequences, think of the how, think of what work is clearly something that we need to preserve and then adapt elsewhere. But let's not delude ourselves into thinking that this is easy, or we're halfway there, or we're almost there. We're nowhere near halfway there. We're in the sort of foothills of the massive climb that we need to climb. And I don't think I want to leave it to my son is your age, Kevin, and my daughter's just younger. I'm not willing to leave it to them. We have to do our work before we exit stage left. And we work together with you, but it's not fair on you, because you will not have a life that you can enjoy if it's just you having to carry the burden. We still have time on our clocks. Chuck and I may be the oldest ones here, but we still have something to contribute, and we want to do this before we leave.
100%. I'll open it. If anyone else wants to chime in, I think Jojo. Go ahead. You're muted.
On Zaid's last point, I completely agree. I think that those who are in the sort of the positions at the moment to be influencing, who are basically running the show right now, actually need to take that responsibility. We should not be expecting the next generation to sort that out, when effectively it's the generation that are incumbent, that have been responsible for what's going on. On the other hand, I would like to slightly counter the pessimistic approach that was just outlined, in the sense that I actually believe that we don't achieve anything without believing we can do it, and B, having a serious intention to do it. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, there is nothing on this planet that hasn't grown out of the ground that isn't here because of human intention. Effectively, it's for my money, it's second only to Mother Nature in terms of the power of what is achievable by it. And I think that the other thing is, but I do totally agree with him about collaboration. I think we absolutely need to, there needs to be competition going on. There needs to be collaboration happening. But what I would say is that having that absolute intention and certainty of moving in a particular direction is actually hugely powerful. I mean, if we went out there and said, let's think about this, might it be a good idea to criminalize ecocide? We wouldn't get anywhere. You have to actually be very clear about what exactly it is that is needed and what it, and actually the inevitability of it, because it's got to happen sooner or later. And we just see ourselves as sort of accelerating something that needs to happen anyway. And we're starting to see that, don't get me wrong. I believe I'm totally with Zaid on the fact that there are mountains to climb. But I believe that if we have that attitude that we can do that, and that there's a very good reason to do that, then things start to move with us. And I think that with the conversations that we've had, I mean, we started this campaign thinking that we were crowdfunding for diplomatic work that was already in progress. What we actually realized is that where the conversations around ecocide were happening, that was where the political dial was moving. So we know that actually, and of course the youth movement and the rebellions, for example, the climate mobilizations have made a huge difference to that. They've opened up that conversation in the media so that these initiatives can start to move forward and actually be heard in a way that a few years ago was seen as extreme. And now it's starting to feel like common sense. So I do feel like that we needn't be, the light may not be immediate, but it's definitely there at the end of the tunnel. And if 100%. We can see it, how are we ever going to head that way? So I think I'm kind of both in agreement about the generational thing, and a little head wobble there from Zaid. But I have to say I'm a lot more positive about what is possible, what is humanly possible. I actually think our system does a terrible job of bringing us up to feel like we have agency. I think human beings are actually hugely powerful, and that is educated out of us. And so, if people sometimes say to me, how did you make a career of your activism? I didn't make a career of anything. I just wanted to get something done. And, we kind of have this sort of sense that somehow we have to sort of hook ourselves into a particular job or a particular arena and kind of gradually crawl our way up some ladder. It's all nonsense. That's because we've been, told that we're a B student or a C student or an F student at school. There's so much more to us than that. There's so much more to our connection with nature. You only have to watch, small children connecting with the world around them to see that that's the case. And I think that, accessing that power and that humanity is absolutely key to all of this. And that doesn't deny that there are complications, that the situation is complex, and that there's a long way to go. But I think that we have to approach that with absolute, passion and certainty and knowledge that that is the way we need to go.
Yeah, 100%. And I just want to, with keeping with time, because we do have breakout rooms, I want to just thank you all for this amazing discussion today. And I want to instruct all the people who are watching that if you want to see all of these amazing, lawyers, campaigners, and people who are just doing amazing work around making sure that we have and implement the Stop Ecocide and the human rights, the rights of nature. It's all intertwined at this point. There's breakout rooms. So go ahead and choose your breakout room of your choice by using the sidebar navigation for an interactive Q&A. So you're able to interact with the panelists. I just want to one more time say thank you to all of our panelists for being here and for giving their amazing perspectives. We can go on and talk for more than 2 hours on this. For 1 hour, I'm glad that we were able to get what we got, but this is such an important topic. And I would love to ask the audience to join Grounded's community, climate community, and visit grounded.com to learn more about climate solutions and how to take action. And I'm sure in the breakout rooms, or all of these amazing panelists will talk about their amazing organizations and what they're doing. And I know it's also Giving Tuesday, so support grounded.com, grounded.org, donate to Grounded, and the amazing work that they're doing. And thank you to the audience for attending this. And don't forget that Grounded is also doing something in January, so join them in January for the Climate Academy theme, rooted in climate solutions. With that being said, I will let everyone go to their respective breakout rooms. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.